And welcome to the Law and Crime Trial Network on what looks to be a busy Tuesday. We have a lot to get to. I'm George Spencer, in today for Jesse Weber, and joined today by trial attorney Terri Austin. Good to have you with us, Terri. There you have it, a culmination to an undoubtedly dramatic case. Grant Amato found guilty by that Florida jury, really across the board. And trial attorney Terri Austin joining us again today. Terri, you've been following this case along with us. Watching that brother on the stand, just in near tears, the tears we saw of his longtime girlfriend there in the courtroom as the verdict was read last night. Are you surprised by this outcome?
I'm not surprised. I think the jury came to the right conclusion, and they saw that this defendant actually, in cold blood, murdered his mother, father, and his brother. And they said that these lesser crimes were also guilty. And
so, Terri, tell us a little bit about that, because it seems like basically every lesser included that was even available for the jury to consider. It seems like they were checking the yes box on almost everything. Is that your sense of it?
That's right. And what you'll see in Florida here, you have a verdict sheet, and what the jury is going to do is go through that sheet. And they literally do check the box. So he had a gun, he possessed a gun. It was the gun that was discharged, and that discharged gun actually was the gun that killed the victims.
And we know also, Terri, the jury had available for its consideration in this case lesser degrees of murder. So they were considering first degree, which is what they found for all three of these victims. They had available to them second and also a manslaughter charge as well. They went with the very top, did they not?
They absolutely did. They found that this was intentional. There was no question that he intended, when he went there, to kill all three of the victims. And so because they found this intent, it was able to come to a conclusion that it was first degree.
And Terri, I just can't get away from just the human element of this. I mean, this is, of course, a trial that we have watched play out from a legal perspective. But, you know, I saw Jason Amato's girlfriend there in the courtroom. She was the woman you saw sitting next to him just weeping. She had taken the stand against her brother-in-law. Her longtime boyfriend, Jason, had taken the stand against his own brother. The family saga that came to a close last night on a human perspective is almost incalculable, almost impossible to put into words.
That's right. Even if these family members are testifying for the prosecution and against the defendant, they are still family members. And to your point, human nature takes over. And you do, even though you wanted the individual to be found guilty, you do have these feelings and these emotions that overcome you when the verdict is ultimately delivered.
And Terri, so this three-pronged guilty verdict, first degree murder, guilty on all three of those victims. The prosecution really worked to set the stage for this jury as they went into their deliberations yesterday. Before we got to that guilty verdict on all three of that mother, father, and brother, we want to give you a sense of exactly how prosecutors set the table for this jury as they were considering this terrible case, all that went into it, and the host of charges against Grant Amato. Let's take a listen now to how prosecutors made their closing arguments. And there you hear a summation of the closing arguments from the attorney for Grant Amato, working to convince that jury that there was, in fact, reasonable doubt in this case. Terri, obviously we know that in the end the jury did not buy there, did not go there, but I'm interested in your take on what that defense attorney did there, working hard to really seed those pieces of reasonable doubt. In that soundbite we just heard you saying, I'm not saying it was a drug transaction, I'm not saying it was Jason Amato, I'm not saying it was a random intruder, but it's sort of this sprinkling of all these little thoughts that, hey jury, you might consider this. Does that tend to work, Terri, when people are going that route and trying that kind of sprinkling of doubt around? It could be almost anything?
Generally, it doesn't work unless the defense can put on some evidence, even though the defense doesn't have to.
Right.
He's right. All you have to show is there is reasonable doubt and that the prosecution didn't prove their case. But the jury is looking for all of these other possibilities, and the defense did not put on evidence to that effect.
Yeah, and the thing I'm wondering about, it's got to be quite a hurdle for a defense attorney in this case where there's so much sort of this international intrigue with the cam girl surrounding it, and we know what drama this family has been through to try and get Grant back on the straight and narrow, get him into rehab, the ultimatum that Dad got him. Even though the prosecution has the burden, it seemed like the defense had a much harder kind of row to hoe as they were doing this work. Is that your take?
I agree. The problem here is there was so much motive behind the killings. As you say, the cam girl, the money, $200,000.
Right.
That's a lot of money.
It is.
And so it's a motive to do these crimes, sadly.
And when you think about how the prosecution, we watched that clip of the prosecution, making their closing argument there. They say that stuff about, Grant didn't have a gun, but he was able to get his hands on it. I guess ultimately, based on what we know with this verdict, guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder, the prosecution was able to sort of thread that needle enough to get the jury where they needed to be to come to this conclusion.
That's right. He had access to this gun. He was in a room where the gun was held for a certain amount of time, and the prosecution was able to show that he accessed that gun and that he used that gun, obviously, in the killings of these, poor victims.
All right, Terry, big developments, of course. We are tracking a guilty verdict on 3 counts of first-degree murder in the Grant Amato trial breaking overnight. We will be diving into that and our other life cases here on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Stay with us. We'll be right back.